And I think a lot of people are concerned about this in very real ways that, we're past the point of no return, that things have gotten to such a boiling point where, you know, if Trump lost this election, or if Trump won this election or whatever the outcome is, people have this thought in their head of like, well, what if we get January 6th times 10 times 1,000 times a million? Like, do you think we're past the point of no return in many ways as a country? Do you have an optimism that like things are shifting? Like, what's your kind of temp check on the country? And I know this is very subjective, but I'm curious what
Yeah.
your perspective is.
Look, I am generally optimistic long. Okay. In the short, a little pessimistic because I do think there is threat of violence after this election. I mean,
Yeah.
and it's not going to be at the US Capitol and it's not going to be on January 6th. It could be at state houses. If you think about, let's take a state like Arizona run by, Republican legislature that has to certify election wins for it to be legitimate. Let's say Kamala wins Arizona. Can you see, I could see Republican House simply refusing to certify her the winner, which has never been done. You set up a constitutional crisis. That's a concern to me. The loyalty of the military is to the Constitution, not to the president. Generally, that's a good thing. But what happens if Donald Trump convinces people that the Constitution requires them to defect from the military, right? So these are things we have to be aware of and I think go into eyes wide open because part of the problem with January 6th is we had a failure of imagination. I actually predicted violence on the 1st of January. And, Kevin McCarthy specifically basically dismissed me for that prediction and said I was wrong. And so, we have to have this imagination. But, so I preface with the bad news. The good news is, I think what you're feeling in the Kamala race, and I was at the DNC, you're feeling this optimism boil up a little bit, at least in the Democrats. I was on the other side of Obama '08. I was a McCain guy, but that was kind of like what we were sensing was happening in Obama '08. But I've always sensed that as angry as America is and divided and like there is this undercurrent that's growing and you never know it until these waves pass. But there's this undercurrent of growing of people that are sick of this and want to heal the system. I mean, when you probably look back at the comments on this podcast when you talk about, how do we get people that can just disagree disagreeably again or agreeably again? You're going to have a lot of comments saying yes, yes, yes. There is this undercurrent of people desperate for that. And so I think you will see in 2028 and even before leaders come along with that message. And I think they're going to be rewarded for it. So I do think in the long term, this country is going to be fine. We're going to learn how to deal with the new media environment and this divisive environment. But I do think in the short term, we need to be aware of the dangers and that we're not out of the woods.
I tend to be optimistic long too. And I think we've seen Trump slow so much with this momentum. And I don't see any other candidates that are trying to be Trump Jr., like really gaining traction. I think once Trump is not a figurehead in that world, I think we're going to see more sensible, I hope, more sensible candidates, coming to the forefront to pick from. Because, the idea of holding your nose and voting just is tiring to people. And I think that's why there is optimism, like, for a Kamala Harris. There is somebody that, we're not worried about her, mental capacity, her physical health. We're not worried about, extremely divisive rhetoric. Like it feels a lot easier. It's easier pill to swallow.
It does. And here's the other thing is, look, let's just look at this from a 50,000 or 100,000 foot overview of history. We've been debating abortion, guns, and taxes for 100 years. Okay. My guess is if we quantum leap forward to 2024, we're going to be debating abortion, guns, and taxes. Okay. That's the human nature. This is what you happen when you live in a self-governing society. And I think people are understanding, yes, there's these differences, there's these things that divide us. But look, they're always going to be there. And with Kamala specifically, it's like, but I'm not sure the faith in democracy is always going to be there unless she wins. I think that's helpful. And I think people are starting to get there's this desire to be like, let's disagree agreeably. And I'm optimistic that we're there. But like I said, again, I don't think it's automatic at this point.